My name is WISNIOWSKI Zbigniew. Those who speak English probably understand that there was a famous Zbigniew in the United States in the government of Jimmy Carter. He was also Zbigniew, but I don't equal to his importance, thus I cut it off to the first 4 letters, Zbig. Z is a capital Z with big following the Z, and it's pronounced Zbig rather than Zbig like many people say it in English. It's Zbig.
And when and where were you born?
And I was born in 1931, and very soon I will be, in fact in 3 days time, I will be 80 completed. I always felt like 80 years old because I had many experiences, more than 50 countries in my life, etc. So I always felt like 80 years old. And I was born in Poland. A settlement was basically ex-military settlement, but there were also private properties. And so I was born in Warszawka, which translates into English as Little Warsaw, because my father named it. He was a great patriot. In fact, I have my father next to me, but he was dead for many years. 1942 he was dead. And as you notice, he looks like a nobleman, and he was a nobleman. So he named a new settlement Warszawa with a diminutive K added before the last letter, then becomes Warszawka. And Warszawa is of course the capital of Poland, Warsaw. So anybody who is Polish from the roots or an immigrant from Poland, he knows what Warszawa is.
And what part of Poland was this in?
And that was a place, as you know, there are many parts of the country, and they were certainly changed. There was about 48 different shires or counties, and now there are only about 19. So it's outside of Poland now. It was southeastern part of Poland, and the shire or the county was the Tarnopolskie, which was next to Lwów. If you speak German, it's Lemberg. If you speak Ukrainian, it's called Lviv, but it simply means the city of the lions. Lwów, the city of Lwów.
So how old were you when the war broke out?
Well, I was growing up very fast because in Poland you had to. In Poland, I was born to a father who had a farm in a way. And he moved in there from western part of Poland, completely western, near Poznań. It was the closest county to German, excuse me, you know.
To the country, Germany.
Yeah, Germany, but quite close to the capital of Germany.
Berlin.
Berlin, yes, that's the word I'm forgetting, but being of old age, I forget names, and the names have to run from the back of my mind onto the tongue, and they go through the labyrinth. Anybody who has some education about Egypt, they know that many people did not get through. So anyway, the fact remains, I am now an old man, and in a way I'm glad I don't remember everything that I lived through, because it wasn't funny. I lived through over 50 countries in my life, and I enjoyed it when I was younger. But now I only remember parts of it. Amongst others was Siberia, and I was basically about one of 10% of people who were taken to Siberia by Stalin's reign. Those people survived Siberia, but only about 10% of them. Amongst them, my father did not survive. On the other hand, there were many other people in my family that suffered tremendously. I had a brother. In fact, the whole family was taken to Siberia, by force, of course. And it took us about 13 days to get to Siberia. But when we were finally getting out of Siberia, it took 2 full months, January and February. And if anybody's heard of Siberia, they know that, especially during the war, we had no Russian cards. I don't mean Russian, I mean Russian cards, that we could buy something if we had the money. So it was very tough to survive. Lots of people died. In our family, only father died. And
if we can go back to the
in Poland, we all worked. I was the youngest, since I was born in 1931. It was a question of doing what a small child could do, because in 1939 the war broke out, and in 1940, in February the 10th, we were taken to Siberia. So in Poland, I was looking after the geese, after the cows, the hens, anything that one could have on the farm. And so we had lots of food to have in Poland. We had 24 morgas, that I think it was an Austrian area, measure of area, which would be equivalent about 12.5 acres of land, I believe, into English. So we were not poor. We were second richest in our settlement. There was a family, there were 3 brothers, and they created their own families. The name was Kwolek, I remember that much. But I don't remember too much about the names of places, because I went through wars of Korea and Malaya, and even Hitler decided to postpone my life to afterlife. However,
in your family, you say you were the youngest. How many were you?
I was the youngest.
Children?
There were a total of 9 of us, 2 parents and 7 children. So I had 5 sisters, and the oldest was a sister, and the next 4 were sisters. Finally, my brother was born, and we were all very proud of him, even after I existed. But before that, I replaced a brother. His name was Wacław, or Wenceslas in English, which was a king, the name of a king in Czechoslovakia. Famous, by the way, because he became a Saint Wenceslas. But I replaced my brother, who died at the age of 3 months after birth. So I was known for the first 8.5 years as Wacław. And things have changed historically, because I preferred the name Zbigniew. You see, so from then on everybody had to call me Zbig, because that was the official name at christening. And what else can I say about my birth? We all had duties. So I was looking after the geese, the chicken, and whatever else there was on the farm, like opening up the peas, collecting garbage and so on. That was my task, because I was the youngest.
And you also were going to school.
Of course, but I only did 2 grades in Poland, because by that time it was, the 3rd grade was already disconnected from my experience in Poland. I started 3rd grade when I was in Siberia. And believe me, that was tough, because while I learned Ukrainian in a Polish school, and that was another thing that I wanted to mention, my father created that school. He collected money, he went, besides his own work, his farm work, before all his social work he had to do, he still tried to create a school. And the school was only done thanks to him. Was made, the building, the professor at school, and there was only one at that stage, because it was a primary school. So we had the Polish alphabet, we had the mathematics, etc., as you would have in most schools. And it was a settlement's children. I only had 1 kilometer to go to school, from my house to the school. But it now gives you an idea how big was the settlement, because normally the school is the central position. And that's where the professor was living too. It was Professor Kanas. I still remember his name. Kanas.
And how many schools, how many grades were there in the school?
Well, I only remember what I can remember, and there were 2 classes in 1 room. It was just the beginning of the education, because it was a brand new school when I was there, and we started from the age of 7. So I only have the experience of basically 2 grades. 1st grade, the alphabet, etc., the counting, the basic arithmetics, and then I was taken to Siberia with the whole family. So there were 8 members taken to Siberia, and one of my members of the family was my sister, second born in 1919. She was taken to Warsaw, Warszawka, because our aunt was there and her family. She had 3 boys, and they were fairly well educated. One was a lawyer, the other one was a policeman, and the 3rd one was a soldier. So when the war started in 1939, he was a soldier. The policeman was unfortunate, because during the war he was burnt with the German bombs. They called them Schaffer, which means, well, I don't want to get involved too much, but it was a mobile bomb which was sent to destroy a building and also to set it afire. They all lived in Warsaw, the 3 brothers and the mother. So he was burnt. Finally he was shot, probably in mercy by the Germans, because he was so badly burnt that he probably would suffer a lot. However, my sister went out there.
Before the war or after the war? She went?
1937. In 1937, she was the only girl amongst 3 brothers, and they lived in Zakroczymska. It was the name of the street, because Zakroczym was a settlement outside Warsaw, and it's a kind of equivalent to have an Ottawa, for example, the street of Montreal. But it was an Ottawan street, and Zakroczymska was Warszawian street. So that's easy to understand, because it was pointing towards Zakroczym.
And her name was Janina?
How many? I'm sorry.
Her name was Janina?
Janina was the name, which translates into Jane, or Janine en français. So she was my best sister because when she went to school, she was already in the secondary. She was 12 years older than me. So she was already in the secondary, and they had more privileges than we, the little fellows, and so on. So I would run out to meet her when she was coming back from school. She had always something good for me, especially the good word, and a kind of a something. It was a bun or a candy or something, that she loved me and I loved her, as the little children would do. However,
was there anyone else in the family that didn't go to Siberia with you?
no, everybody went to Siberia other than my sister. She ended up as the heroine of Warsaw. She was given a job during the uprising in 1944, the uprising in Warsaw, when they wanted to liberate Warsaw. She was given the scouts to look after, to defend the city from the Germans so it would not get destroyed. While in the meantime the Russians were waiting on the other side, on the east side of the river, and they were just rubbing their hands. Look at how the Poles are dying from the Germans, and they did not attack the Germans to help out win Warsaw from the Germans. So that's history, and I'm sure that they can find that elsewhere. I wasn't in Warsaw at that time. But I was always very happy to know that my sister was alive during the war, and she came out alive as a leader, as a soldier from a camp, from a, what would you call that thing? The military camp, because Polish underground army was known to be soldiers, not civilians, and so they were recognized by pressure of the Americans and the Allies that they have to be recognized as soldiers, even though they were women. And I even saw a very short film, very short section, how my sister was marching into the prisoner of war camp. It was just a short section, but I recognized my sister in it. She was a beautiful woman, and she was extremely, very brave. She gave me several stories how she had to lay down in the mud, in the water, and when the machine gun was going, she had to put her face into the water to make sure that she doesn't get killed by the machine gun that was running towards her, the bullets. However, it was one of those things that I never knew, because I was in Siberia at that time. I was taken to Siberia in 1940 on the 10th of February, and that was very, very different to what anybody else would be taken as a prisoner of war. I was a child, and the whole family was taken out by the people who did not necessarily agree with the Poles in our area, and so they were put on the sleigh. The soldiers, 6 soldiers, came to our house and started smashing the door with the butts of the rifles.
Right.
At 6 in the morning, and that was 6 in the morning on February the 10th, which is not the same as summertime. It was cold, it was dark, and those soldiers came over. Then they were Russian soldiers, by the way, but there was one civilian who was their guide, and I do not want to create hate between one nation and another, but he wasn't Polish. So all I can say is that he wasn't Polish. And when my mother was packing, the Russians told us, "Собирайся." That means get ready, get outside. Собирайся. So where? Nobody knew where we are going. So my mother wanted to take the cross off the wall. And the guide said, "Shoot her, kill her." And the Russian, the leader of the 6 people, the leader said, "Not allowed." So he saved my mother's life. Of course, to me all this, I was a child, to me all that was very strange. We never had an invasion like that from anybody so early in the morning, especially in the winter. The pressure was tremendous because we were all in bed, we were all asleep. However, my father was used to this kind of treatment because he was from the western part of Poland, as I mentioned before, near Berlin. And it was a very, very tough life for him. His family was disappropriated 3 times in life. First of all by Germans. He moved to Austria, and after a while he became again. Through hard work he became a property owner. The Austrians took it from him. Those were the histories. And finally the Russians took everything from us. Stalin did it. Anyway, we were all together now because my sister was in Warsaw since 1937. Oh, and my brother at that time of the morning, 6 in the morning, was already out of the house. He was going to an 8-kilometer distant secondary school, to Brody.
And his name?
His name was Mieczysław, or Miecio for short, diminutive of Mieczysław. And he was the best student in our family, and also at the same time the best sportsman in our family, and in the class too, both. I had 4 sisters, in fact 5 sisters when they were at school in our area. They were all top of the class, each one separately in their specific age group. And my brother was both a best sportsman and the best student.
Can I ask you to name your parents by their first names and
No.
your siblings?
My parent, the father was the oldest. At that time he was 52 in 1939. He was born in 88, so I think the arithmetic more or less is determined, but when he was 54 he died in Siberia on the way out. So I don't want to anticipate the system of priorities. However, he was born in 1888 and my mother was born 1894, I believe.
And his name was?
His name was Lucian. Her name was Apollonia. Came from the word Apollo. Anybody who knows Greek history, Apollo was the god of beauty, and she was beautiful. That was one reason why my father selected her. Now, shall I?
You can show your father again.
This is my father. As you notice, he was a nobleman. He was dressed as a nobleman, and he was the greatest help that I've ever heard of at that age, of being a social worker for free. Whenever somebody needed any help, he was helping. anytime there was a petition to be made by any of the peasants in the area, he did it. And it was normally written in such a way that it was heard by the people who could grant it. So he was a very popular man. He was loved by all three different groups of people: the Poles, the Ukrainians, and the Jewish people. Of course, we didn't have too much to do in those days with the other refugees, because Poland was like Canada today. All the refugees were coming to Poland, including those who were hurt by the Turks, which is basically Armenians. So we were living in a very fine family of people. Even in my family, my present family, we have 6 nationalities and 27 different names in our family as the kins, the relatives.
But if we go back to your family, can you name all of your sisters and brothers?
I can definitely name them all. There were, of course, all the names were Polish names. Stanisława was the oldest, born in 1913. She died in England in a long history too. I can line that up later. Janina was in 1919, and then there was Władysława. There is a lot to say about Władysława's suffering while she was in Siberia, but Stanisława also suffered because all the women in Russia had to work of age, and all the other people, boys, girls, they had to go to school when they were not of age, of going to school after the age of 15. So there is Stanisława, or Saint Stanislaus name, known to the English people, Janina, Jane, then there was Władysława. It's a typically Slavonic name. The famous of Sława means famous of. And they all had the word in Polish ending with Sława. So we had, once again, Stanisława, Janina, but she had also Świętosława name. And that's what ended up on her grave, Świętosława. And she is in Montreal resting. Then Władysława, the famous of władza, of power. Then we had Bolesława. And after Bolesława we had my brother, Mieczysław. In Russia, he became blind on the first year of being in Siberia, Mieczysław. Following that, we had Bronisława, or Apollonia, because Apollonia was already the name in my family. My mother had Apollonia. So she also acquired the name Bronisława, which was her second Christian name. You see, the nobleman had the idea of having 2 names at least. In some nations you even have 3 names. Well, on the 3rd name, we would get that on the confirmation ceremony. And I had also 3 names after the confirmation by the bishop, but that took later. In 1942, in April the 6th in fact, in Tehran. It was Persia then, now it's known as Iran. And Polish bishop gave me that, but that came much later, after Siberia. However, we ended up in Siberia. 4 members of my family were transferred to another camp, which was way up north, close to 63rd parallel. There is the White Sea. Why do they call it white? Simply because it freezes up and it stays frozen for a long time. It's that cold. So that was Arkhangelsk. Or
who were sent? Who was sent there?
the whole family. It took 13 days by various means, first of all by sleighs and then by train. We were sent to a place called Konosha. Konosha shows on the map as approximately halfway between Moscow and Arkhangelsk, which is the city on the White Sea. And everybody knows that Moscow is the capital of Russia, still in the European section of Russia. However, we were sent away from a distance because Konosha was the name of a town, and we were nowhere near the town. We were in a slave camp. So I had to go to school, and everybody else before the age of 15 had to go to school, and there were only 3 of us. And all my sisters, all 4 of my sisters in Siberia, which was Stanisława, Władysława, Bolesława, that's 3 of my sisters and my father, had to go to a forced labor camp in clearing out various parts of the forests and putting the logs. They had to cut down the trees, and they put the logs onto the water by various means. The first part was to put them on the rails, and if you can imagine, the rims of the vehicle, of the car rims without the tires, those were the wheels on the temporary rails, which were made of wood. And then you had to load those first and bring them to the river, and all that was by human force, not by horses or anybody like that. So it was an extremely tough life, especially that there was hardly any food to eat, and it was extremely cold. At times in the winter, the temperature in Siberia, where they were, was in the degrees about Celsius 55, and if it was 55, they had slightly easier work to do. But if it was warmer than that, they had to work in the forests. So you can see why so few people survived, because only 10% survived getting out of Russia. And my father did not survive. But when it came to an agreement between our Polish Prime Minister, who, after losing the war to Russians and the Germans at the same time, because there were only 17 days difference between one invading and the other invader, Russians being the latter. So from the point of view of time, Poland could not survive both invasions at the same time. Especially that the communist Russia told lies that they are coming to push the Germans out. And it turned out to be the opposite way ultimately, because Hitler pushed the Russians out of Poland all the way to Stalingrad. And when they lost the war, just like Napoleon, they had to back out. And at that time, it was 1942. And in 1941, there was 21,000 Polish officers. 1940, in fact, wasn't it? 21,000 Polish officers were simply shot, which was totally against any military law, because you don't shoot, you feed the prisoners of war, and they were Polish intelligentsia. They were the officers, and there were also doctors and priests, just the cream of the crop. And they were shot one by one with a pistol, one by one. So the history repeated itself very recently with an aeroplane carrying 2 Polish presidents, one ex-president and the other one is still a president. And when they went to the ceremonies, the aeroplane was somehow destroyed, and all these people died who were in the aeroplane, and there was no reason for it except that the aeroplane was repaired. It was first of all a Russian-made aeroplane, and then repaired in quotation marks. That it was destroyed, and all the people in it died. The history repeated itself somehow of what happened to the Polish Prime Minister in Gibraltar when he was leaving our camp, but that was in the later stage. General Sikorski and his cabinet died in Gibraltar when the aeroplane was destroyed. So I have many political parts of the history of Polish endeavor to freedom, but Poland finally got its revenge on destroying communism when the other countries could not do it. And they did it peacefully because Poland was a civilized place. They weren't interested in killing people, they were interested in self-defense only. And they could not take the slavery because Poland was a democratic country, was always fighting for freedom. Even their motto was "for your freedom and ours." They backed up Napoleon because they were not free in the earlier partition of Poland. In fact, it was a triple partition, and so on. But I'm not here to talk about history right now, except my own history. So I took on the Russian language, the Russian writing, which is Cyrillic alphabet, and so on. My suffering the cold, because we didn't have clothing, we didn't have footwear to take the minus 55 Celsius in the winter. And the winter there was 7 months. Summer was very hot summer, like in all the big continents. 5 months and just a day or two in between winter and summer. We were not allowed to cook inside the barracks that we lived in Siberia, because there was always a fear of fire. We had to build a cooking place for outside the barracks. Anyway, we had nothing to eat basically until we had something from forests, from berries, and so on. That's how we lived. The first year, my brother became blind within 3 days. First day, he said, "It's getting dark in the room." On the third day, he saw nothing at all. Sometimes he could still see something, but very little, like an umbrella on the background of white, which was either a window, daylight, or a wall. If somebody was hanging an umbrella, which was black normally, it was a shadow of something dark.
Was this from disease that he went through?
It was the disease because he went to cut some firewood, and of course it was hard work for a 15-year-old boy. So when he was cutting the firewood and it was cold, he was sweating, and he came back with fever. So within 3 days he was totally blind. Well, there was a small chance in due course, a small chance that he could go to, I think it was Arkhangelsk hospital, and there was a doctor experimenting with putting injections into his one eye. He wanted first to try one eye, but when Hitler attacked Russia, he was moved out of the hospital back into a forced labor camp, and his eyes completely closed down again. But there was a small progress. Let's face it, Russian doctors were not totally stupid. They were trying various things. I also know of some other experiments, which is besides the point right now. But there were other experiments with the memory problem. And maybe we shall get wise and we'll discover something, but we have to be very conscientious that there is always a chance when some intelligent people think. They are not political, because politicians don't always sin with too much intelligence. Politicians are somehow in a different class of people.
Did your mother work?
My mother was looking after the small ones, me and the 3 younger ones, and cooking also. But there was a chance also that the forced labor, the 4 members, had a chance to walk 16 kilometers back to meet the rest of the family, but only for Sunday, which was in Russian known as Vychodnoy. And Vychodnoy does not even mean Sunday, but it meant that to the forced labor. It means that going out. Vychodnoy is the going out thing. Because I don't think communists believed in holidays. There was no God except Stalin. And there was no choice. We were really, at school, we were trained to be communists. And as far as my experience was concerned, to be communist means to be a slave, whether you are a civilian or a child. It did not matter. You were being punished. When we prayed together, somebody saw us through the window, and my father went into closed arrest. Not just because a family was praying to God. We needed to pray because that was the only hope that we had in God. And I'm telling you, especially my mother was good at praying. She was good even at praying in England, because she was growing old after all those experiences in life. She suffered, and she managed to pray for hours on her knees, and she got her prayer answered. So if anybody does not believe in prayers, well, it's too bad. My mother had a prayer in the form of a Polish church in an English town, and it was basically our family that had that, but that was only after they moved from Lebanon, from Persia, etc. But it took 2 years for us to get out of Russia, and then my father played the main role. Stalin had agreed with Polish President, Polish Prime Minister, General Sikorski, that he would let the Poles get out of Russia, because now they have a common enemy, Hitler. So my father wanted to get out of Russia, but the local communists did not obey Stalin's agreement because they were going to lose their labor force. And my father was forced to organize a strike against communist local authorities, and lo and behold, he succeeded in getting their agreement too. So he now had to manage to get the transport, and all he managed to get was, by miracle, because of the strike, they let him have 3 cattle wagons, the things that the cows are transported in, etc. So he put over 100 people in each of those 3, and it took us a full 2 months, January and February, just after Christmas, January and February, took 2 months to get to the Caspian Sea. Now the Caspian Sea has, on the other side of the coast, has Persia. And so we were taken to Pahlavi. Pahlavi was the town on the Persian side. So once again we had to suffer hunger and starvation because we were not received permission to buy anything, even if we had money. So our golden rings, our golden chains, our stopwatch, our watches, pocket watches, etc., and clothing also, were exchanged for some food in the local villages. And that's how my father died. He went to get some food, took a bucket, and he went to get some soup or whatever he could get in exchange for clothing, for footwear, because it was a 2-month trip. So it was next to impossible to survive. So in our place we were fortunate because a Ukrainian member of the Polish community managed to get a stove, a metal heat stove, with accepting firewood or coal. So it was now a question of other civilian people who were escaping Siberia to get the firewood, to get the coal, and it was relatively possible because all the Russian transportation was done basically by train. It was on the railways, there were no roads to speak of. Anyway, it wasn't too much as long as there were volunteers who were healthy enough to go and steal something, whether it was coal, wood, or whatever it was, that would help to heat the wagons. So in our wagon we were fortunate to have some heat, but I was asked to steal a pipe for a chimney, otherwise we would all die inside from the lack of oxygen and with carbon dioxide and monoxide. So we agreed with my sisters that if the guard catches me, I have to throw the chimney, the metal pipe, to throw it down and run to save myself. And they took the pipe after I was caught. And how I was caught, that's another thing. I was hoping that the soldier with a rifle and a bayonet on the end will not catch up with me, but he did. Why? Because once, when I was trying to go under the train to escape him, because he was bigger than me, I bounced off one of those metal bars that connects the wheels with the rest of the wagon. I was bounced back, and he got me. So now it was my experience of adventure. Like those 21,000 Polish military officers, I was pointed with a gun behind me. First of all, the soldier brought me to the railway station master, the commandant. And he asked me questions, where did I put the pipe? Well, I did not tell a lie. I put the pipe on the ground and I ran away from the guard that was chasing me. Well, finally he almost believed me, but there was no pipe yet. So he decided to threaten me. He pulled out his pistol and told me to turn around. Well, I knew what was waiting, but I didn't care as long as the pipe was picked up by my sisters. My father wasn't there. My father went to get some food with a bucket, as I mentioned earlier, and he didn't come back on time to the train, and the train left off. At times, first of all, we did not have any train schedules because this was just a slave train escaping from Siberia. Secondly, sometimes we would stay at one specific station for 6 days, and another time just 6 seconds or 6 minutes for that matter. So you could never predict, and you could not find out how long, because this was communism. So when one day my father went to the village to get some food, he managed to exchange something for food. But when he got back to the train, it wasn't there anymore. He decided, since we are going southwards, he decided that he has to jump on any train. And he jumped between the railway goods trains, that's the ordinary whatever they carry, but between them on the metal parts which couples the train, the two wagons. And all he had was left over. And he got frostbite. For a long trip, that train kept going, and it was still Siberia. So he got the frostbite, both on feet and on the hands, and probably on the face too, but face normally can take a little bit more because it's always open. And you could see the blisters on the hands, you could see the blisters on the feet, because the water starts running and causing the skin to lift off. And one day he managed to catch up with us after several weeks of trying whatever he could. In fact, he even had some help from the Ukrainians, because there was a Ukrainian train also doing the same thing. They were escaping from, but that was from another area. And he managed to get a lift with the Ukrainians, but when he caught up with our train, he was very, very sick. And on the 6th of February, which happens to be my mother's birthday, on the 6th of February, he died. And it was very painful to us, because he got the gangrene, the blood disease, from something that the felczeryca caused with the dirty tools, medical tools. She did not do a good job, and I was afraid to hear that Quebec is going to put in felczerycas, which is not a nurse, not a doctor, but something in between. And she did my father in. And that really hurts, because I would have been a different child. But finally, when we got,
The microphone.
sorry, when we got to Persia, to Pahlavi, by the way, that was the name of the Shah of Pahlavi. They call it the king of Pahlavi, but his name was, the title was Shah. That's the title of the job. And they called that port on the Persian side, they called it Pahlavi. When we felt that we are free, we were put into the shower, all of us, all our clothing, all our property went into the fire. I saved my prayer book in my hand and I took it with me to the showers. So that was something. By the way, I forgot to mention that I was not shot. I don't know whether the man has decided to ask me what was my age. I thought, there is a chance. Maybe he has I was a quick-thinking fellow. To save my life, I was already almost 11, but another 2 months approximately before 11, because this was still on the Russian side when I was being threatened with a pistol. So I thought I will be accurate so that he will believe me. I will be detailed. And I mentioned that I was 9.5, but I was more than 10-year-old. And I thought at that time, as a child, that maybe 10 is a two-figure number. Maybe there is a border somewhere. And I wanted to be detailed, so he believes me. And I said, I am 9.5, sir. Or words to that effect, you know, sir. Tovarish. And tovarish means a neighbor. Whatever. It's tovarish. So I said I was 9.5, which is respectable in a communist system. So he then let me go. And all I had was no more than 3 minutes to get from his office into that train. But I managed. And then I found that my family, my sisters, managed to get the stove in, and they hid it in the corner of between the wall, the vertical wall of the carriage and the floor, because we did not have a toilet, of course, so we had to excrete normally into the grass. And the sisters put that pipe into the corner between those two items, the wall and the floor, and they covered it up with a straw, which they had, of course, for excretion. And they put the waste on top of the grass, so when the guards came over to look for the pipe, they didn't know, first of all, in which of the 3 wagons I was, and secondly, they didn't want to touch what smells so badly, and so they did not discover the pipe. So my pipe managed to figure in the number of people who survived, because while there was approximately over 100 in each of the 3 wagons, there were only 10 who died, which includes my father, of course. He died ultimately during the trip, but the trip was a 2-month trip. So you can see, in over 60 days roughly, we had 10 dead. In the other wagon, there were 40 dead. 40. And there are only 10 in ours. And in the third wagon, there were 60 dead. Can you imagine? More than half of the wagon dead. And believe me, this was, everybody kind of agreed with it, because it was impossible to survive. There was no food, they had no heaters, we had a heater. So when in 2008 I got the medal, I started wondering. I never thought that I was a hero about the pipe, you know, the chimney. I never thought of that. But when the Polish consulate granted me the cross of a relatively a hero as a Siberian sufferer, I was surprised, really, because it was really my father that was the hero, because he is the one who organized the escape from Siberia in spite of communism. And he suffered the death which I could have suffered, but for the mercy of the commandant who did not shoot me.
When your father died, were you able to bury him, or did you have to leave
that
him?
is another event. When my father died, if you wanted to have him buried, not just thrown to the dogs, so to speak, you had to go and have him registered. And my older sister went to register him for burying. Probably would be buried in the ditch somewhere, but would be buried in the ground, not left to the ravens and the dogs. Then she was left away from the train. The train left, and she, well, you know, it takes time to have him registered, etc. So now she was in danger, because she had no money, nothing to survive on, and not enough clothing to exchange, etc. Because this was already more than halfway away from where we were to where we wanted to be. However, it was still cold, because it was still February. So she was left over. And now, something that saved her was Russian drunk officers. She managed to find a place where she could sit next to where the officers were eating. And, well, Baryshnya, Baryshnya means lady, lady. What do you want? For 3 days she was suffering hunger, and she didn't even have anywhere to sleep, because she was left away from the train. And so some of them would give her whiskey. That was the first thing that saved her life, because she became warm, slightly warm from the whiskey. You know, Russians are known for vodka. So she got vodka, and she became alive again. And that's... Nobody ever likes to speak about it, but we managed to get something from those who suffered, very little. Whether it was from my sister in Warsaw or from my older sister Stasia. However, she survived, and then she managed to get in contact with the Polish recruiting people. First of all, those Russians gave her the chance to survive. And now she could find slices of bread thrown out by the officers, etc. She managed to survive. And she joined the Polish army. She became a nurse. And later on at Monte Cassino, she was one of the nurses that managed to save some of the wounded people, but they still had to carry all those dead. And as you know, there were over 800 dead at Monte Cassino in Italy during May 1944, I believe. And so she was again another hero in our family. Well, I was no hero in 2008, and I was so surprised that it's my father that really deserved the after death reward, but he never got it. But he has my heart, and I will always remember him, because he was like, in a small, very small amount, she was like Jesus Christ, who died for all the people, no matter what religion, no matter who the nationality was. Jesus Christ died for all of us. But my father died for some of us, but for a very small group, he managed to do his, or sacrifice his offer. He gave his life for trying to keep ours alive. And that still brings tears to my eyes. Mind you, I'm trying to do the same thing too, for my grandchildren and for my children, because I think that we really deserve the freedom. We didn't go around killing people as lots of people do. We had no colonies, and we had no victims. Yet we managed to change the system from communism into democracy, although it takes time to change the colors, because a certain heart, it's pretty hard to say, but we are proud that we consider a human life as precious. We didn't kill anybody, we didn't look for victims. We were the victims. But we managed, without finding victims, we've managed to gradually change over the population to freedom. And that's what's important to me.
When you reached the Caspian Sea, you boarded. Did members of your family join the army?
No, because I joined the army on the 12th of March, which was still in Russia. We were living in kind of half underground and half on top, covered from the rain. But that was in Uzbekistan, a place very close to Kitab. You might find Kitab on the map.
That's where my grandfather died.
In Kitab? Well, so your grandfather might have been even on our own train, because lots of people become sick on the trains. But I'm telling you.
Did you stay long in Uzbekistan?
No, because it took the whole January and the whole February to travel in the train. And we had some starvation experience once we got into a place called Sakryjab. But over there we already had a Polish army recruiting camp. And we were being recruited to save as many as possible from the age of 12. You had to be 12 years old. And I wasn't quite 11 yet. Not on 6th of February, not on the 12th of February, sorry, not the 12th of March. But sir, I told the recruiting officer, sir, I am 12, sir. And I learned later there was one who was only 7 years old, and he must have told the same lie, because he was also recruited in. And once we are recruited, now you can get onto the ship. The family was behind. And my sister, Bolesława, she died in Tehran. And even there they misspelled our name. They spelled it with E instead of O, Wiśniowski. They put the E in there. And my son, Stefan, tried to have it repaired, corrected. and I don't know whether he managed, but he did contact the ambassador of Poland in Tehran, because that's where she is lying. All I have is this photograph, and it very clearly shows the letter E. Didn't the Polish people hear of Wiśniowski, Teofil Wiśniowski, who was the member of the government, and finally he was hanged with a very, very historical name. You know, he was hanged with Kapuściński in Lwów by the Austrian government. Even Germans were protesting that specific hanging, because he was a lawyer and he was invited into the Tymczasowy Komitet in Paris. He lived in Lyons, France, and he was asked to join the government because he was a very intelligent person. But he died without children. That's my grand uncle. But if we are talking about the history, my great-grandfather was the first one to be sent to Siberia, and I believe he went all the way to Kamchatka and escaped back to Poland.
And his name was?
I think it was Kazimierz. Kazimierz. So he escaped and he got back to Poland. 1963, yeah. 33 years later, his son was taken to Siberia.
And his name?
He was Roman. He is my grandfather, my father's father. So he was taken to Siberia, and he managed, but I don't know from where. We don't have that historical thing, because he changed his name into Tuczyński, because our name was now in the books. And Tuczyński went back to Poland, and he learned that our property has been taken over by the Germans, because that was in Poznański, and the województwo poznańskie was in German hands, and the Germans have cheated my countess, grandmother, cheated by making an agreement with them, which she signed, but they never paid her, and they took over the property. So my father had no property. Anyway, my father went over to southeastern Poland, not Poznańskie, it's Tarnopolskie, yes. He managed to find the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. He married her in Chereszenki. It was a little village. She was the only girl in the family, and she had now a what we call ojczyn, which means second father. The first father died, and now she was brought up as the lonely daughter, no brothers, no sisters, and she was the most beautiful girl that he married. Anyway, my first two, my great-grandfather and grandfather, apparently lived 106 and 107 years, because I think the suffering that they went through and the long trip back to Poland that they went through managed to give them so much strength. And only recently I heard that it's the cold winters that increase the longevity in certain nature. I think it was mentioned to me that it was in vegetation, but also there are certain things like lizards, etc., I don't always listen to the radio, but the radio is on all the time in my place. I just turn the volume down or up, and sometimes I hear things which are very useful. You know, I could mention, for example, that those people who have their cell phones, that put them against their heads, they don't realize that they are destroying, gradually, slowly destroying their brains by radiation. Anyway, I became a radiation expert in engineering, in electronic engineering. So I know that why not? If you were shooting with big bullets, like the machine gun bullets, wouldn't you get killed? Very suddenly. But these are very tiny bullets. These are the radiation bullets, you know. And people should learn to keep away from radiation, from anything which radiates.
We go back to the story of Kitab, near Kitab, where you were, how long you were there, and what kind of ship took you to Persia.
I think that we were there for a short time, and it was just an ordinary ship. All we had was sardines for food. Must have been a civilian, probably Persian ship. It was handled by the, you see, I'm not strong on history, what happened, but there is a book which is stronger than I was, and I learned something from it by another Siberian. And it's called Travels in Life, I think is the name. Podróże życia, Podróże życia. Travels in Life. I have that, and I meant to bring it here, but sorry, it was too sudden. Everything was too sudden, and
so you left with the army, and your family
I was a soldier. I was a soldier in civilian clothes. When I got to the Kitab, to the Pahlavi showers, everything, all the clothing was taken from us, burnt. And I don't want to mention it, but the poor Persians were jumping into the fire trying to take the clothing, but it was full of lice, full of disease. So the British soldiers were beating them away with their rifle butts to get out of the fire. They wanted to save their problems. But there were British soldiers, there were not Polish soldiers there in Pahlavi. And we were given uniforms of the British gifts, of British nature. I know when I got boots size 4, that's the British size 4, I could just about rotate inside the boots. You know, it was so funny, but at least I had clothing, and now I was a real soldier.
So your family stayed in?
For a while they stayed, and when I was still there, I was trying to save them some of the food that I had. And I remember one soldier, if he's still alive, one Polish soldier, he had a mess can full, it was full of kasha, which in Scottish it would be porridge, I suppose. And I asked him, I begged him to please give me some food. That man, I never got his name, I would not remember his face, but he cut his food into half the mess can, and he gave it to me. There were 3 other people, or 4, probably 4, because my sister was still alive, the one that died in Tehran, but she died because of Russia. There was simply starvation on the train. We were very fortunate that we had, on the Russian railway stations, we had hot water in the taps in Russia. Otherwise, there would be probably all of us dead, because there was no food and there was no way of getting it. So There was my mother. Stasia was out, but Władzia was there. Bolesława was there. And my brother was there. He was blind. So, and yeah, there was one more. That was my youngest sister, Bronisława. But I thought, whatever I can give them, what's left over, not left over, shared, you know, whatever I could give them, that would help them survive. And there was also some soup that they had from the Opieka Społeczna, which was run by the civilian authorities. However, there was just soup, basically. If you had a dish that you could put into, they would give you one of those measures, and that was it, basically water, because they didn't have enough for so many refugees. And even I found myself in hospital in Tehran because my skin was rotting from what I suffered when I was in the forest in the north. It was still rotting, and there was no such a thing as penicillin in those days. Nowhere. The best you could have was iodine, which was a big pain because it was stinging. Iodine, iodina. So you can see that there was suffering psychologically. We didn't know where we were going, but at least we now had the Polish authorities once we are in Pachlevi, and that helped us out. I remember going through all the deserts of Middle East. We were going through until we got into a place called Bashit in not Israel but Palestine. It was then Palestine. I hardly met any Jews whatsoever. I remember seeing one, and they were telling us to go back to Poland, like the way that they heard in other countries to go back to Israel, you know. And so they went to Israel. And I only met one Jew in Palestine. The rest were Arabs. Because in 1947, we were taken on a ship to England. And in England, I still went back to this, because in Palestine, I was in the Polish secondary school. First of all, I was in Nazareth for 3 years, doing primary school. 2 years each of the 3 years which I was in Nazareth, in Jesus land. And then I was moved under the tents into the Polish officer cadet school called Barbara Camp. In case anybody hears the word Barbara, it was about 10 kilometers from Gaza. And Gaza today is a 1 million population of Arabic nation. But in those days it was just a village, and there was only one building which was made with bricks. The rest were just mud buildings, mud and straw. Now it's a big city. The big building was NAFI, Navy, Army and Air Forces Institute of British nature. So you could buy your candy there, you could buy some things, but we didn't have that much money. So
while you were in school, did you manage to see your family, or they were somewhere else?
I will tell you, I managed only after a while. They moved from Tehran. There was a place called Ahvaz in Persia. And it was Persia then, not Iran. Persia. So they were taken care of by the Polish authorities. But finally they were shipped to Lebanon. My brother, the blind one, was shipped to Ahvaz, and in fact he has had a vision of our sister Bolesława, who said to him in his dream, but to him he was blind, so it was a reality really. First there was sadness, and now I'm in paradise. She said that to him. And there was another one he mentioned, but I forgot now. He had two miracles really. So, but he loved God, and he was hoping. While he was in, he rejoined, of course, the family when they were in Lebanon. They were something like 21 kilometers away from Beirut, and Beirut was a beautiful city when they were living in a place, I have to think, it was in the mountains anyway, a beautiful place, very friendly Lebanese people, and there was no wars between the Mohammedans and the Christians. That was caused from outside, and I don't want to mention who, but history knows. So
did you all get to England at the same time? Or?
No, I was with the Polish army. I was in the officer cadet school. After Sikorski was killed, he came to our camp, to Barbara, and from our camp he flew towards London, but he had to refuel in Gibraltar. In Gibraltar. I'm glad you have a memory. So this was a great loss to us. I was then, this was 1943, I think the date itself was 4th of July. Historians would know for sure. But it struck me that it was the 4th of July, a beautiful day in Palestine, and all of a sudden what we have is the death of our beloved Savior. Because at that time General Anders did not play a role in my saving. He himself was a prisoner, and he showed a lot of bravery that he managed to survive in the first place. But the mistake, I think, was not a mistake, was a bravery when he sacrificed something like over 850 people dead, and a lot of thousands of wounded people, who some of them might still be surviving in the Montreal hospital here at St. Anne de Bellevue, the western end of the island of Montreal. Especially that my sister was in the 3rd hospital as a nurse, and she met a man in England whom she married, and he was in the 11th hospital, and both hospitals were very close, in kind of very close to Wales, and my family was moved from Lebanon to Anglesey, which was more or less on the same height of the British Isles, but Anglesey was west of the 3rd hospital and the 11th hospital, so it was a little bit easier to reunite the family. And my sister in Warsaw, once she was in Germany, there was the Red Cross after the war, and through Red Cross she managed to find out about the rest of the family, But my oldest sister, the nurse, she managed to find me in Nazareth and visited me in 1943 in Nazareth. And I'm telling you, I was still a child. I was crying 3 whole days non-stop. I was weeping 3 whole days when she left, because this was the only family that I had when I was in Palestine. But I went several times. Once my family, the rest of my family, went into Lebanon. I liked Lebanon. It was civilized. It was not simply robbed of the goods like Palestine was robbed. It was, the buildings were different. There were stone buildings or brick buildings. The roads were good. They even had a railway. Not in Palestine.
So what year did you get to England?
I managed to get in 1947 in the fall. That's...
Were you still with the army, or did you go to the family then?
Well, no. Then that was my next event, joining the British Army, because when I was still having the first half of the year until Christmas in Norfolk, that was on the airport, the whatever. It was a lotnisko in the barracks that used the fighter planes against the German Luftwaffe. But there was no more aeroplanes. There was still runway there, but no more aeroplanes. There were barracks, but there were metal barracks. You know, those corrugated metal along the length of it, and bowed, and we were sleeping inside, so we were protected against the rain, but we were not protected against the cold. So when the cold came, we were suffering a little bit. And believe me, we remember these things somewhere unconsciously. That was the worst time that we had while we were in the Polish army. And then I and 11 other boys from the Polish officer cadet school were relegated to a camp, to what was a mechanical Polish school. You see, we were the creme de la creme because we were good students. We were doing the job that the future officers would do in Poland, future leaders. And then we were shipped, for I don't know what reason, by a Polish officer, the commandant of the school. We were shipped to a place called Lark Hill, Fargo Camp in England, which was on the Salisbury Plains in England. And over there was nothing to do, and the only thing that was to eat was dry potatoes, cooked but dry potatoes, dry peas, and very little else. Tea probably, or I don't think we had coffee. In those days England drank tea. Now they drink coffee. They lost the colony of tea, and now they have coffee. Anyway, my life was always a new experience. So how did I end up in the British Army? Simple. I had no choice. We were told by our new authorities, one of them was a major, I believe, out of the Czechoslovak army. And he told us, "Chelomich, chelomich, chelomich." That's the Czechoslovak expression for wash your body. Anyway, this was a good advice, and we had water, but we did not have firewood. So the boys, not me and not our cadet school boys, but the mechanical school boys, were taking fences apart, and they had the firewood. But the 12 of us did not have that, so we were still cold. And we were told by this Czechoslovak major that we have one of three choices. That we either work in the coal mines of South Wales, or go to the forests of Scotland and do the same thing as my sisters and my father did in Siberia. Or the third one is to join the British Army Apprentices School. There we could become the technical people. But until that time, I was still an academic, an intellectual guy. I was learning Latin, I was learning English. We knew English by now from Palestine. But I was learning Polish history, Polish geography, etc. But we didn't have the borders then. It was still a secret from us that we don't have Poland anymore. We now have the Russian authorities in Poland. Anyway, the whole thing that did hurt us the most was Sikorski's death, because he was a right man, he was a correct man, an honest, decent man, even under Piłsudski, you know. There were only three of them, Piłsudski, Sikorski, and I believe Haller, who were fighting for Poland as leaders, because afterwards we only had politicians as leaders, you know. And one of them ended up his life in, that's, I believe, Kresy-Siberia, was it? In what's the name? Next to Spain is Portugal. In Portugal. I visited Portugal with my wife later on to see Fatima, and of course very little of the capital of Portugal, which was a port. It's, I forget the name, starts with a P. Yeah, did you? Well, you remember we went by plane to Portugal, to the capital, and then we went by bus to Fatima. Anyway, my adventure elsewhere was all over the place, because I was in France with that Medlock train, which took me to visit my sister in Bavaria, because she escaped to the American, my sister Janina, she escaped into the American zone of Germany, because Germany now was occupied by four powers: France, England, Russia, and America. So she escaped. She walked 80 kilometers one night to get out of the camp and to get to the American camp, the American zone. So that was relatively further south. And I visited her in 1951 with her new husband. He was a singer in Teatr Wielki w Warszawie, in Warsaw, the great theater in Warsaw. He was a famous singer there, Wiśniewski. My name is Wiśniowski, one letter difference. So she married him, and when he died, she moved to the United States with him, by the way. with him. He was still alive there. But she married another gentleman, Pawliszak, which name was spelled in 3 different ways in Canada, with Pawlisz with SH, and with a W instead of V, Pawliszak. And there were 3 brothers and a sister. I got to meet one of the 3 brothers when my sister died here.
If we go back to England, when you joined the British Army.
Well, it was Army Apprentices School, and it was in Chepstow. Some people called it South Wales, and others called it Gloucestershire, England.
And you were there for how long?
Well, 3 years. It was a course, a 3-year course, but it was a sentence in the British Army for 10 years. And it was 8 years starting from the age of 18. So I learned a trade. I learned, first of all, how to be a British soldier, and I was a Polish soldier, so there wasn't that much difference. But they respected me because all the others were rookies, you know, just beginners. And they were younger than me. I was already 16 and a half. And once again, I had to tell a lie about my age. I was no longer 9 and a half, sir, but I was now only 16, because the figure 4, which stood for April, changed into figure 9. Now I was young enough to join the British Army, because you had to be less than 16 and a half. So I became less than 16 and a half because I was only just over 16 and a half, you see. So that was it. I joined the British Army, I believe it was the 22nd of January, finally. Again, British in January. They love to say it's a lovely weather, Mrs. Hoskins. But that lovely weather was always rain in south of England, you know. So we moved over, and I was moved to Chepstow. And there I had normally a 6-week course, I believe it was. But we had blacksmiths and sheet metal work as one type of course. But was it 6 months or 6 weeks? Then there was turning, welding. So there's welding, blacksmithing, sheet metal work, that's basically scissors and metal, and bending and shaping. There is turning, the lathes turn, rotate, and captains turn. So that caused me to teach my brother to select what course he would do in England. He was a blind man. What course he would do if he didn't want to be a musician, because a musician can play an instrument, whatever. But he turned out to be much more than that. He worked by being taught, for a blind man, being taught a trade. He was doing the turning, the lathe turning, and ultimately he became the inspector the last 2 years of his life. The inspector on the lathe where other people were doing. But I'm telling you, there is no substitute for intelligence. He was very intelligent. He was a good learner. He was in church. He was the leader of singing. He would buy tapes and learn the new hymns for church. And
Organ?
no, he did not play instruments, but he would sing. And he would also be a an altar salesman, what do you call it? Ministrant, you know, the server at the altar. But he would not be right at the altar, but in the first bench. And finally, he would learn each of the new church hymns, and he would sing them. There would be a lady next to him, Polish lady, and she would learn to sing from him, and then the rest of the church, which would then be the Polish church, which was prayed for and obtained by my mother's prayers, etc. And also, when my brother called for the Polish people to approve of building a church in a specific place, which was, well, hundreds of yards, not 1.5 miles, which is just about 2.5 to 3 kilometers, because 1 kilometer is not enough for a mile. It takes 1609 meters, so it's 1.6 kilometers basically. So my mother could not go that far to the Irish Catholic Church. She wanted somewhere closer to home, and she prayed until she got her prayers answered. They built a beautiful church, and it's not just a church. In England now, my family is no longer there because all they died off now. I am the only survivor now at the age of 80. So they are all in England. They are all buried in the Stoke Road Cemetery, where the famous Scottish poet is, and his name was Gija?
Burns?
That's the guy. Burns, yeah. Robbie Burns. And it's a Brobracht Nacht to Nacht. That's what he was saying.
So you ended up in the British Army for 10 years?
And I went, if you're talking about the rest of my life, I was taken everywhere where it was dangerous. Korean War, Malayan War, although they did not call it war, but it was worse than war, because there was no fronts where you are on the safe side or on the dangerous side. In Korean War I was 18 months. In the Malayan War I was fighting against the communists who were trying to get rid of the British. It was a colony, and it was a natural thing. And one day I managed to find myself in the forest, in the jungle, and I decided to be ambitious. I wanted to swim in it, and there was a stream and a very small amount of water in a little pool. So I decided with my own hands to enlarge that pool, and I was picking up the rocks from the bottom of that water and making equivalent to a beaver dam, but with stones, not with wood. And that was not too far from the camp. But I had to dive when I finally, there had to be time when I removed enough rocks to make sure that I can swim. Well, the water was getting through the nose into the system, and I ended up being very, very sick. In fact, dying sick. By that time, I've been in England, of course, and I got to know this young lady behind me. I don't know whether you see her in equivalent. And I got to know the champion family of Mr. Żytkowicz, who was an Olympic champion. I believe it was in Romania on skis. So I stole his daughter for a wife. Only when she was very close. She only had 1 more year to go to a university, and even then I've managed to marry her, and she's still my goddess. She is the best I ever could find, and I'm so happy that she has saved my life at least 2 times since that time. Once I fell repairing the roof. I managed to fall on my head, but I rolled in such a way that it was not my head that was so bad, but my
Shoulder?
yeah, the thing, the łopatka, what's that in English? What?
Shoulder blade.
Shoulder blade, that's the name. Shoulder blade. Sounds like a razor blade. Anyway, the point is that for 31 days she kept me in her bed and looked after me. I would not go to the hospital because in the hospital they treat you like a thing. So I was dead probably by now, but I'm still alive thanks to her.
So you were married in England?
Married in Canada.
Oh, in Canada.
But this was a beautiful marriage because, sorry, it was the United States, New England. It was New England, Hartford, Connecticut, and her father prepared all the wedding for me and for her. And even there we had some, I think it was Japanese students, or was it Korean students? The ladies. The ladies. Anyway, so I doubled my family from 8 to at least 16 because Żytkowicz family, who had only 3 daughters, expanded into lots of grandchildren. And now there are probably even more of them than me, because
So you had 4 children?
I had 4 children. I wanted 6, but I realized that I cannot educate all 6. But now I have 12 grandchildren, and I intend to have them all educated. So at first I bought them the scholarship, because in Canada here they created a scholarship. So I first managed to provide money for the 7 scholarships. Now I've donated more money towards those who are left out, and I'm still giving the best I can out of my pension. So you see, I don't have too much to give other than save on food, save on expenses. I no longer have a car, but I have a 2-wheeled car. It's a bicycle, and I am the engine. So I don't spend money on gasoline. I don't go to Toronto or Vancouver anymore, but I did earlier. I carried the whole family, and I almost died because in Canada, when you have a bend and there is only a two-way thing, you don't pass around the corner. You can pass on the inside thing is allowed to take somebody else's lane, you know, the other side lane. But one day, when we were going to visit Vancouver, all the way from Montreal, because that was a treasure, very much treasured thing, that I see the whole of Canada. I had already seen east of Canada, Gaspé Peninsula, New Brunswick province, Nova Scotia, and also I went on Nova Scotia as far as I could. The only place I did not see is Newfoundland. But in the same way, I've already been in all the continents except South America. I've been in Africa, I've been in Asia, even in Japan, in Korea. I've been in Fiji, in Australia, so there's nothing to boast about. You see, we have lots of Polish songs that say, from place to place we are traveling, you know, and especially the scouting songs, you know. I became a scout. I went to Mount Tabor from Nazareth, which was Jesus town, 4 times, and it was 16-kilometer trip for a Boy Scouts. So while I was a soldier, I was also a scout, and in here I'm still a scout even at the age of 80, you see.
Now, what would you like your children and your grandchildren to know about your history, to retain? What is important to you that they understand about what you went through with Siberia?
I don't think they know enough about me. Stefan got specially interested, because I had nominated him long ago that he is the one who is going to take over the family name. You know, we have three children that are male and 1 is female. So her children are named after the husband. And she retained in Quebec, women retain their maiden names for certain purposes, but for other purposes they are known the same way as their children, after the husband. So it's problematic in the case of my Irena. She's already born 1963 in February the 3rd. So she is still Wiśniowski, not Wiśniowska, but Wiśniowski, because she takes up the maiden name. In English, that's the way it is. So, and this is Quebec, and Quebec is different to other provinces, as everybody must have recognized. Even the Prime Minister Harper gave them the title of a nation. So they are not a separate country, they are still Canada, but they are a nation. And we have 6 nations amongst Indians, the North American Indians.
But when you think of your children and your grandchildren and your history, what do you want them to remember about it?
The name.
The name is the most important.
The name, and they are proud of having been in the center of Europe, that is Poland, because Poland is somehow slightly derailed, but if they read Polish literature, if they could only learn to read literature, on the Żydkowicz side, one of the daughters became a nun. And when she was over in Houston, Texas, she was learning Polish. I am hoping that not only my children speak and write good Polish, but my grandchildren too. But they haven't started that yet. But they are still very good students, and so they deserve the scholarships which would help them to get educated. One of them, in my opinion, was irradiated by the local tests which are in fashion. When he was still in mother's womb. So he was born with liquid, they call it water, but it's liquid, in half of his brain. So he is not 100% perfect, and thus he is backwards, but he is now being moved somehow. I wanted him to go into the high pressure chamber with oxygen, and somehow that was not quite what the family wanted. and I have no power over adult family. So the only thing I can be is an example what I can be towards my children and pass on the message of good intentions towards my grandchildren. Of course, those who are grandchildren, they married, my children had married non-Polish children, and that becomes a problem. And they did not realize it, because when you're in love, you are stunned by love, by the heart, not by the head. But had they chosen Polish girls to be married to, you never know what would be. But so far, Stefan has a mixture of Irish and French. So now the family is half Polish, a quarter Irish and quarter French. So we win. We are not conservatives, but at least we won the Polish side. But I don't know how much does his wife Anne-Marie speak Polish, but she at least is tolerant of Polish, because I see that Stefan is doing Kresy-Siberia. He even wanted me to be in Siberia again to show him what we had to suffer. No thanks. No thanks. I don't want to suffer again. I suffered when I swam in that little pool in the forest, because I was so sick that I could not even write the daily letter to my beautiful wife, who was then my future wife. I wrote every day except that one day, and finally they discovered, the doctors in Kuala Lumpur, that's Malaya then, Malaysia today, changed name because they added, I think, a Borneo or something, or New Guinea. They added and they subtracted Singapore, because Singapore is now a Chinese city because of the majority of Chinese people there. So I survived because the doctors woke up on time and they saved me with something. They must have been doing guesswork. You know, military doctors are not experienced doctors, they are young fellows. So I was in hospital for several days and I was going down, down, down the drain. But they saved me on time to survive high temperature. But that was the time when I could not write. One day, the next day, when I got the medicine, I could write again. And I didn't send off every letter, but I wrote all except one day. And I still love the young lady, and I'm sure I have her heart inside mine. A wonderful woman, I'm telling you. I wish other women had a heart like my wife has.
Well, on that beautiful note, I think we should end this interview.
Well, whatever is not said is because when I was once in court, my judge had me for half-hour scheduling. And there were 3 other people for the other half hour because he had only 2 hours for himself. And do you know, he dismissed the others and had me doing the talking for 2 hours. But that was a couple of years back, and I was a younger man then. You missed me by a couple of years. You would hear much more. But I'm very proud of my grandchildren. These are the youngest.
Wait, you can't.
These are the youngest. I'd like to show them how beautiful they are. And their father is their father is my youngest son, and lo and behold, these are the youngest three.
Roman,
This one is Roman Kazimierz, eh?
Roman in the middle. Roman,
Oh yeah, Alexander. Roman Alexander.
Roman is in the middle.
Stefan Alexander, Roman and Kazimierz, and this is my beautiful granddaughter. And she would remind you of historical figure in Persia. Her name is Daria, and that is obviously a name borrowed from Darius, who was the Persian. Now, I've learned a lot of history around the world, but I don't know it all. I just don't know it all. I forgot a lot, and the most of the history that I've been learning was either Roman or Polish, because there is lots of Polish history. But the only thing you haven't heard was my trips around North America. I had 9 women and myself, and for a short time, one other man, my son, Jan. He went with me in a car through Canada all the way to Expo 86, wasn't it, in Vancouver. And he only went to Expo. He saw everything there was to be seen, and of course they were all impressed because in Vancouver they built up the new buildings, you know, for the show, for the exposition. And there was also the fastest moving train but in the world, the Japanese, but it wasn't moving fast at the show because it wouldn't be able to stop on time.
The women were from Poland. The women were from Poland.
Of course, there was my oldest sister, Janina, who was the heroine of Warsaw, and so she had her last experience of seeing the world. And then, somewhat later, she joined me here and died here in Montreal, at this cemetery. And we are going to share, the two of us and her, we are going to share the same plate on top. It's a bronze plate on a rock which is called quartz. It'll stay there as long as the cemetery is there. It's my property, and I am blessed amongst women. My sister Świętosława, Janina Jane Świętosława on one side, and my wife has a mark on the other side, and I'm in the middle. So that's one thing that I preciously treasure. I know where I'm going to be living after death, and I don't want to be burnt because certain parts of the body are still alive after I no longer breathe. And nobody is yet determined because the dead cannot speak. So some of them, when they are bitten by a tsetse fly in Africa, they sleep for 3 days before they wake up again. So I treat my body in the same respect, that it might be sleeping for 3 days or 3 months, I don't know what. Today in church I've heard that there was a guy by the name of Lazar or Łazarz in Polish. Lazarus, yeah, that's a Latin expression. Us, it's not just United States, it's also the Latin ending. the Italians substituted it with the letter O. So it would be Lazaro probably by now. Nonetheless, the fact is that Jesus Christ asked his Father that Lazarus be alive. And after 4 days, he told Lazarus to get out of that grave there, out of that jaskinia, which is the cave, you see in English. So Lazarus was obedient after 4 days, when some other people were saying there is already bad odor coming out of there. But he came out too, alive and kicking. So from that point of view, you never know how long your body lives really. It obviously goes down the drain, but some of those fellows who have been mummified in Egypt long ago, they are there from the thousands of years. And I don't know whether they're alive or not. They don't breathe, they don't talk. But just the other day, there's a child who is 3 years old, and he is lost. He doesn't hear and he doesn't talk, and he is lost. And I don't know why the police, who have such a bright bunch of young people who joined the police, even my son Jan wanted to be a police, until he was hurt by the police. He was badly beaten up by 5 policemen when he was 19 for speeding, apparently. So police is not necessarily just. Anyway, he was badly beaten up, kicked and boxed. One 19-year-old child. He will never remember it, but he doesn't want to be a policeman anymore.
I don't think we're going to send that to the museum, though.
Well, the point is that they go by the American law, you see. And that's pitiful, because we had better police before. Now we have worse police. They are more brutal. Anyway, that's besides the point. What do we want to put on here yet? That judge.
Oh, the 9 women were Polish visitors. You wanted to name who they were.
We went. First of all,
your sister?
there were 7 women who came from Poland. I sponsored them. I covered the costs. I rented the vehicle, which was big enough for 10 of us, but not 10 seats. There were seats left missing. So what I did, I bought a lot of food and I created a seat out of that for a second seat. You know, there's the 2 seats in the front, the steering person, and the next door, who was my map reader to guide me to the right places. And she could even speak English too, very good English. Then the next bench was for 4 people, so that's already 6. And what about the other 4? I put the food and the support on top of the cans, etc., and that was their seat. And the rest was something I created with a wider board, so that they had also the rest. And lo and behold, there were 4 ladies from Lublin, the Polish Catholic College, when it was still communist country. There was 1 from Warsaw, 4 from Gdańsk. 4 from Gdańsk. Right, Żydzia? 4 from Gdańsk, 2 from the Catholic Church in Lublin, and 1 from Warsaw. And there was a difficulty for each group the four could not get the visa to the States, but they got the visa once they got to Montreal. So that was those four. The one from Warsaw could not get the aeroplane seat. And lo and behold, she got it because I knew a pilot who was helping me out with shipping clothing to Poland. And the two from the university were good students, but they had to be paid. Well, ultimately, 6 out of 7. No, I think I paid for all 7 for the aeroplane ticket, but also food. And I warned them they are going to be traveling like scouts, like Girl Scouts. My sister, of course, if she could sleep or sit for hours on end in the water, in the mud, she could, at the age of 65 or more, she could still do it. And she's seen the whole of North America, starting from Ottawa, in the tents, very few times, but in motels. That was relatively cheap because I budgeted for that, and I still had some money left. So those who went to Poland got about $140 each, which in 1986 still meant something, not much, but something. But that was the leftover money. And the 8th one was an Austrian girl, a friend of a girl from the University of Lublin. KUL, Katolicki Uniwersytet Lubelski. So she got that, and they were all very, very friendly and very useful. The only point is that my son fell in love with a girl who had a problem with her knee, because when the girls were celebrating, she was a sports girl from Gdańsk, and she broke her leg and had a problem because a car in Gdańsk has hit her, and that broke her leg. But she was the very best basketball player, and she elevated her team by her scores, elevated her team to the top of the league. And she was going to be playing in 2 weeks' time in the European Championship. And lo and behold, that thing happened because an old man was driving a car when they were crossing the road. But she came, and she survived, and she was probably the most wonderful girl she was. And Jan fell in love with somebody else, but I think I'm getting mixed up a little bit. There were 2 girls. One was the lame one, and the other one was the university who spoke English. You see, my brain works better in the morning than in the evening, but it's c'est la vie. That's how some brains work.
Well, shall we wrap it up then?
Well, I think so. But the interesting thing is that they were all very grateful because it was still a communist country. And when we got to Houston and we saw all those displays, you know, that we had from the spaceships, I think they call them wahadłowce in Polish. So just in case somebody wants to know, it's those spaceships that are being sent by the Russians and by the Americans, and I understand even by French. So they are wahadłowce, but I am not 100% happy with that expression, because suggested they were wobblers, you know, and that's not right. So what can you do? We were welcomed there as the VIPs in the control center in Houston, because the control center of the Americans was, and I was very happy to accept that treatment, because I felt that when we've seen Canada all the way through and the United States around, we were almost across the river in Mexico, but we were trying to get as far as we could, and that was something like 16 or 17,000 kilometers. So it was quite a distance, and I managed to earn enough money to show all those communist-governed people what freedom is like. And they were even inside the Walt Disneyland in Los Angeles. And we were welcomed by the Catholic Church in also in the same place, but further south. It's a suburb of Los Angeles. So we tasted the 8-lane highways in Los Angeles. I'm telling you, America is a wonderful country, but it always has to have something bigger than anybody else. So Montreal has the big tower, but it's only a show tower, a radio tower. It's not 102 story house that I visited, or a church with 960 steps in Ulm, Germany. The oldest church in Europe for sure, the tallest in Europe, in Ulm. That's Bavaria, I believe. I was there in 1951 with my sister Yasha. I'm telling you, it was a wonderful place to see after England and all those other wild places. But it's hard to put up with all the languages, you know. I can speak some Arabic, some Chinese or Japanese. Wose Polanien. That means that I'm Polish in Chinese, in Mandarin language. And I can thank you and wish you the best of everything in Japanese and a bit of Korean. But when I said something to a Korean family when I was in London, England, they were so surprised because I said that I love them. You know, well, I did love them. Nanan tanjina salanamida. You see, that's in Japanese, that's in Korean, that I love you. In Russian, of course, ya lublю. Not I love, you know, a word for a kochać. They lublю. Ya lublю was. Only like, not love you. They don't have space for love. But they had space for Stalin. I'm so glad that that person is disappeared from the newspaper and from the radio. He didn't deserve to be there. He was rusty Stalin. You see, there's magnetic style, there's the non-magnetic style, and there's a rusty style. And he must have been the rusty Stalin. So, if you pass it on to other people who have been to Siberia, tell them that they've finished their history in Siberia, and some of them might be those that my father saved. Because I never had another father. I had a father-in-law who was very good to me, but at first he didn't like to have his daughter stolen by a guy like me, until he found out the Wiśniowski, what that name stood for. And I'm a nobody, I'm not a public figure, nor am I a public something else which I don't want to mention. There are other public things which are used by most. So, if you wish to switch it off I don't have any major experiences. I had the worst health experience in Kuala Lumpur. I wasn't sure if I was going to wake up the next day, but God looked after me. I wasn't sure that I was going to be quadriplegic, and when I fell on my head, I could have broken my neck, so I moved my neck and it worked. I moved my arm, it worked. I moved my second arm, it worked. And my legs too. So from the back of my house, where I fell down, on a hard ground, very hard ground, I rushed. I did not run because I didn't want to hurt anything. I ran to the front, and my neighbor, who by miracle was just leaving for his car, and his wife was driving him because he had bad eyesight. And I waved to him, but he didn't pay attention. To him it was just a wave, you know. He had to go back to pick up something back from the house, and once again, the second time. So now I realize that waving is not enough. So now I shouted to him in French, "Aidez-moi, s'il vous plaît. Vous comprenez-moi?" A więc he understood that I'm asking for help. He crossed the road, and it was a rush hour. So there was perpetually vehicle going one way or another. But there was a small gap when the vehicle, there was just vehicle absent. So I shouted that, "Aidez-moi, s'il vous plaît," and I sort of showed the sign that I want him to come over. And I gave him my wife's address, my telephone number, and she went to hospital because she expected after such an accident I have to be quadriplegic, because I fell on my head and I rolled. I had 2 ribs dislocated, one on each side, because I hit my chest with a chin, and the chin was hurting, but nothing broken. And 5 days later, when I saw a doctor, she wasn't even listening to story. She wanted to see my bones broken. And she announced that not a single bone broken. How come? You know, well,
Polish people are hard-headed.
they were 2 dislocated. But there is all the time there is some signs of God's help in my life. This is one reason why I don't have a problem believing in God, because He shows His power. He shows His power of suggestion, if nothing else, but also of care. But what am I destined to do for the world? I'm not playing for politics. I'm keeping away from politics. I'm not the best example of a human being. I'm sure that John Paul II, John Paul II, would have been the best example that I've met. Amazing man. I looked at him as if though he was Jesus Christ himself. When I saw him 4 times, and I invited him to Canada, and he came, and he invited me to Castel Gandolfo for breakfast. Well, I didn't go to his breakfast because my son was in South Africa, Stefan, in South France, and he was much closer to Italy than I would have been paying for the trip for a breakfast, you know. So, sure, it would have been a great honor, but I was honored that he accepted the visit to Canada, because he did accept. He came in 1982. He came to New York, and in 1984, 2 years later, he came to Canada, to Montreal, etc. And we all met him. We all met him here because he was such an example of being so close to Jesus Christ that when I saw him at Monte Cassino, he was walking with the Prime Minister of Italy then. After the first Prime Minister, what was his name? I forgot the name of the one that was killed. There was a man killed 6 months earlier. Then I saw Monte Cassino in 79, he was still probably a young lady. So I invited him on the 16th of May, 2 days before his birthday. And he accepted because we have Ulevich, Professor Ulevich, once again, a professor of the Jagielloński University, who married my own goddaughter, my oldest sister's daughter. Now she is Ulevich, she was Bałuk. That's one of the names that was in my 27 names of the family. And at least 6 different nationalities, because we have Japanese, German, Polish, French, Irish, that's 5, Ukrainian, 6, at least 6. I could probably find more. You know, members of this family, the Zbigniew-Wiśniowski merger. And I'm very proud of that, because we are the United Nations. We had, well, Poland didn't have wars with China, with Japan. They didn't have wars with China. But I'm pretty sure that I'll find sooner or later, I'll find one of my grandchildren getting married to a Chinese. There are lots of Chinese here. So I maintain that I have a family that is very international. So what else can I say about our family? We are in Canada, and Canada is following the Polish footsteps of being the refugee to the Jews, to the Ukrainians, to everybody who wants to come to Canada, including Scottish people who were persecuted and were escaping. One of the most famous pilots in Montreal has a Scottish name. I don't remember his name because that's my weakness after the heart operation. But the fact is that he was awarded great honor on the front page of the Gazette, the Montreal newspaper. And I've never met him, but I read about him something. What's left in my mind right now, I don't know, but he was a hero. I'm only left with impressions when I read something. And he was a hero. Polish pilot, Scottish name. So if you want to cut it off, I think that that's about the end of the story. I'm not dead yet, but I'm planning to break the record. You see, I must say I've been to Ireland and I smelled the Cork. The Cork is a port city in south part of Ireland. So I smelled the Cork and I bought some sweaters for the young lady here.